Hello everyone and welcome back to the Parents Game Guide. Today is a special day. It is officially my first actual review of a game. I know, you all have been waiting for it to come, and the day has finally arrived. The game I will be talking about in this video is Bendy and the Ink Machine, an indie horror game set in an old animation studio. This game very heavily leans into the old animation studios of Walt Disney and Max Fleischer of the 1920s and 30s called rubber hose animation. Think like Betty Boop, Popeye, Steamboat Willie, that kind of animation. And this game really was inspired by that style of the animation studios of the old times. I'll be going over the ratings, the content, and the storyline of the game to make sure that everything gets taken into account. Before we begin, please give this video a like and click that subscribe button to be notified of future reviews. Now let's dive into the world of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Like I just mentioned, Bendy and the Ink Machine is an indie horror game developed by Kindly Beast Studios and published by Rooster Teeth Games. It was released in 2017 on PC, with PlayStation 4, Xbox One, iOS, Android, and Nintendo Switch ports being released soon after. A mobile spin-off game called Bendy in Nightmare Run is also available for iOS and Android. And a full sequel titled Bendy and the Dark Revival has been announced and is reportedly coming soon. The game is separated into 5 chapters and is rated T for violence, though there are a few other things that I will be including that should be mentioned. The story of Bendy and the Ink Machine revolves around Henry, the player character, who has been invited by his old boss Joey Drew back to his former place of employment, the aforementioned Joey Drew Studios. Upon exploration of the studio, it appears abandoned. Ink is splattered everywhere and cryptic messages are written on the walls, like this one. Eventually, Henry discovers the Ink Machine, a device that Joey had been using for an unknown purpose, but we learn through audio logs recorded by the other employees that they are wary of the machine, and they think that Joey has gone quite mad. In his quest to find the necessary items to start the machine, Henry discovers a corpse of Boris the Wolf, a character that is friends with Bendy, with his chest torn open and his heart missing. Henry finds the items needed to turn on the machine, heads to see what the machine does, and is surprised by none other than Bendy the Ink Demon, the main character of the studio's animations, though he is not as cartoony or friendly as he is normally. Trying to escape, Henry falls through floorboards and proceeds to drain the ink that has flooded the stairwell. He comes across a strange symbol on the floor, has some strange images flash across the screen, and he blacks out. In the next chapter, Henry awakens and begins to press forward through the studio into the music department. A strange inky figure walks across the hallway, muttering to himself, and vanishes, leaving Henry and the player to wonder where he went. This figure is Sammy Lawrence, the music director for the studio. Throughout this chapter, Henry will see him behaving in a very cultish fashion, seeming to worship Bendy in the hopes that Bendy will free him from being an ink person. He even wears a cardboard mask of Bendy. This is also the first time we encounter inky beings called searchers that appear from the floor and attack Henry, which Henry has to fend off with an axe. Once Henry is able to drain the ink that's blocking the stairs to the exit, he gets knocked out by Sammy Lawrence, who intends on sacrificing Henry to appease Ink Bendy. As Sammy starts his ritual to attempt to summon Bendy, he pauses and seems to recognize Henry, but continues the ritual and is attacked by none other than Bendy himself, and it seems is killed. Henry escapes his bindings and runs into Ink Bendy again. He manages to evade the Ink Demon and ducks into a storage room where he is surprised to meet a fully intact and very much alive Boris the Wolf. Chapter 3 starts in Boris's safe house, where he has been hiding out for an undisclosed amount of time. The two leave to find a way out of the studio and come across the toy department for Joey Drew Studios with plushies of Bendy, Boris, and Alice Angel, Bendy's female counterpart. It turns out that Alice Angel is also alive in the studio, but she's been twisted and corrupted, just like everyone else here. She demands to meet with Henry, so he and Boris make their way to her lair and are attacked by a member of the Butcher Gang, more characters that have somehow been made alive. They come across mutilated clones of Boris and the Butcher Gang, all with their bodies torn open and organs missing. Alice Angel sends Henry on a series of fetch quests to retrieve items for her with the promise of her letting him leave the studio. Henry must now find these things while avoiding the Butcher Gang, the Ink Demon, searchers, and a character known as the Projectionist, an ink-corrupted form of Norman Polk, who was the studio's projectionist. Fulfilling Alice's requests, Henry gets into the elevator ready to leave, but then Alice betrays him and causes the elevator to plummet, claiming that the Boris Henry was with was the perfect Boris, and would allow her to be made whole. The elevator crashes at the bottom, and Henry watches helplessly as Alice drags Boris away, before passing out. Our fourth chapter begins, yet again, by Henry waking up. He leaves the broken lift and makes his way through the caverns that lead to the studio's archives. Henry eventually gets through the archives and stumbles upon a room full of the Lost Ones, former employees who have been infected by the ink but show no signs of hostility towards Henry. Moving forward, Henry learns that Joey had plans to create a massive theme park called Bendyland, but the idea was never fully realized, and what was built was put into storage. In the process of figuring out how to restore the power to the haunted house ride, Henry ends up finding the designer of the park, who has merged with a scrambler ride. This is the first real boss fight of the game. He also comes across the projectionists yet again, and is almost caught by him before Ink Bendy appears and, to our surprise, kills the projectionist. After boarding a car in the haunted house, the ride is stopped by a monstrous, beefed-up version of Boris that Alice had created. Henry must fight Boris and is forced to kill him, after which Boris fades away into ink. Alice runs at Henry with the intent to stab him, but is killed from behind by a mysterious being who turns out to be another Alice, accompanied by a different Boris with a robot arm. In the fifth and final chapter, this new Alice, called Allison Angel, and this new Boris, who responds to the name Tom, have Henry locked up in a prison cell, clearly mistrusting him. Henry is able to gain Allison's trust after talking with her, but Tom remains wary and suspicious. Allison gives Henry a tool that allows him to see more hidden messages painted on the walls with invisible ink. The ink demon closes in on their location, and Allison and Tom leave Henry behind. Henry, through the hidden messages on the walls, is able to find a secret passage along with a wrench he can use to protect himself, and escapes. He floats down a river of ink on a barge, being chased by a giant bendy hand along the way, and arrives at a makeshift town inhabited by the Searchers and the Lost Ones. Sammy Lawrence, who it turns out wasn't dead, appears and attacks Henry, almost overpowering him until Tom sneaks up behind him and kills him. Henry, Allison, and Tom must then defend themselves from the now hostile Lost Ones. After surviving the onslaught, the trio make their way forward, but Henry falls through the floor to the administration level of the studio. Henry works to connect the pipe system so he can drain the escape through the film vault, and learns that a film reel has been stolen by Ink Bendy. Henry finds his way back to Allison and Tom, and they press on to find that Ink Bendy's hideout is a massive version of the original ink machine, surrounded by a moat of ink. Allison and Tom, being made of ink, can't traverse the ink as it would kill them, so Henry must go in and face Bendy alone. He finds a message from Joey that explains the downfall of the studio, and how he can defeat Bendy by showing him the missing film reel called The End. Ink Bendy shows up and transforms into a creature known as Beast Bendy, knocking Henry into another room. Henry is able to escape the chase and plays the film reel in the throne room of the lair. Beast Bendy arrives just as the words The End flash on screen, and Bendy dissolves in a puddle of ink. After all is said and done, a flashback plays where Henry comes to visit Joey's house years after Henry left his employment at the studio, but before the events of the game. Joey explains how their paths ended up being much different, and that Joey eventually burnt himself and the company out due to his overambition. He asks Henry to visit the studio, and as Henry walks through the apartment door, he arrives at the studio as the events of the start of the game begin again. That was Bendy and the Ink Machine, the abridged version, as told by The Parents' Game Guide. Up next, we have a delightful collection of nursery rhymes and lullabies to help you and your child to sleep after experiencing the deep horrors that lurk within the inky blackness of animation. As I explained in my ESRB video, trying to sum up the events of the game in just a few paragraphs can be quite difficult, and I'm sure that there are things that have slipped through the cracks. Thankfully, this game has a pretty straightforward story and isn't really complicated to follow, which, now that I'm thinking about it, makes me really nervous for the bigger games that I'm going to cover that have dozens of hours of gameplay. There are a few more things that I would like to discuss, so let's hop into that. As mentioned before, Bendy and the Ink Machine is rated T for teen, with the content descriptor of violence attached. I would personally also add scary images and mild language, as there is a little bit of swearing in it, and the game is considered to be frightening. There are quite a few jump scares in the game. Some are actually scary, and some are mild things that you could probably laugh at, like a board falling from the ceiling and startling you. Seeing the clones of Boris with their chests ripped open open like they had just had a xenomorph invasion is honestly a little bit disturbing. In my playthrough of the game for this channel, there really weren't any more content descriptors that I could think that I would have added. Now, I would like to share some personal thoughts on the game. I've been following this game since Chapter 1 was released, as it was released with subsequent chapters, and I have replayed all released content once the subsequent chapters came out. I absolutely love this game. I myself am a big fan of the horror genre and any form of media, and I would say that Bendy and the Ink Machine is a really, really good introduction to horror. It's not overly in-your-face scary, there's not a ton of gore in it like you would find in a Saw movie, but the art style really give it a good eerie atmosphere. The combat is pretty clunky and can get frustrating at times, but I got so wrapped up in the narrative and the characters that I got over that pretty easily. The voice acting is fantastic, and for any of you who have kids who watch prominent gamers on YouTube, there is a character voiced by Jacksepticeye as a little Easter egg, which is pretty fun. All in all, it's a fun game that does take a few hours to get through, and I would suggest playing through it at least 2 times, as the little tool that you get from Alice and Angel has a lot more hidden messages to reveal throughout the entire game. It's pretty fun. Well, folks, that is the end of this video. My first ever actual game review. Let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are about their actual review, if you've played the game, if your kids have played the game, and any suggestions that you'd like me to review. I do currently have a backlog of games that I am needing to take notes on for my channel, so you might just mention a game that I'm planning on covering in the next videos. And of course, if you haven't already, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel if you think these reviews will be useful to you, and share this video with your friends. I would love to help as many people as I can, and I wouldn't be able to do this without you. To those already subscribed, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means the world to me knowing that there are people interested in this type of content and who are actually using these reviews to better understand the games that your kids might be playing. I truly appreciate all of you. Until the next one, please be good to yourselves, and I will be back with another review soon.